Welcome to 28 of us who are here now, and I know there'll be people who are joining us. This is a very interesting topic, and I know everyone's interested in this. A little of the mechanics. We have the chat room closed until we open for questions, and Emma Kagan from Jewish Council on Urban Affairs is going to be doing the presentation, and I think many of the questions that you ask are going to be answered during the presentation. And then we'll answer those questions and questions in the chat box, and if we go much past 8:15, we'll, and people are dropping out, we'll send answers to you as a follow-up. Might not be this week because I have no idea of all the computer challenges not being in my own computer. So, so let me introduce Emma. She's Jewish Council on Urban Affairs field organizer focused on the Fair Tax campaign. She was previously JCUA's Avodah organizer for 2019 and 20. Growing up in Shaker Heights, Ohio was where she first gained interest in the power of community and how it can lead to positive social change. In May 2019, Emma graduated with a BA in Public Affairs from Ohio State University. During her undergraduate career, she spent time organizing around community police relations with a sustained dialogue and served as a student ambassador for Hillel's Mitzvot campaign. Emma looks forward to assisting in Jewish Council on Urban Affairs campaigns this year and building relationships with members. While not at work, you can find her visiting the nearest public library, running on the lakefront, or spending time with her 15 roommates. So welcome, Emma.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for such a warm introduction, Beth. I really appreciate it, and it's great to be here with everybody tonight. I know Beth said I did some work on the Mitzvot campaign with Sheila Katz, who I know is your more recent CEO, and I really admire the work that she does, and I'm glad to be connecting with Chicago NCJW tonight and telling you more about the Fair Tax campaign and the role of JCUA. So I'm gonna start a screen share to get us kicked off tonight. Can everybody see that?
There we go.
Okay, wonderful. So as Beth said, my name is Emma. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as a community organizer with JCUA, focusing primarily on the Fair Tax campaign. So for those of you not as familiar, maybe have heard of JCUA, don't really know what we are all about. JCUA has been doing social justice work, organizing education in Chicago since 1964. Our longstanding mission is to combat poverty, racism, and anti-Semitism in partnership with Chicago's diverse communities. So working on economic justice with the Fair Tax, we also work on immigration justice and police accountability, and do a variety of different training surrounding racial justice and organizing tactics. And we're over 2,000 members strong. So really amazing to see what the power of our Jewish community does in all of these coalitions we work on. And so as I said, the mission says we work in partnership with Chicago's diverse communities. And on the Fair Tax campaign, we are working with so many incredible partners. Here are just a few of them. There's actually at this point over 100 different members of the Vote Yes to Fair Tax Coalition that we work with. And one thing that is unique and that I want to share with you all as we're getting started on this presentation is that JCUA is the only Jewish organization specifically working on fair tax. And for me, that's really important to be able to share this information around fair tax and to be having conversations about this issue with all of our congregation partners at JCUA, with our membership base, with other institutions like NCJW, so that we are really spreading the word in our own community, as so many other organizations are doing the same in their communities. So feels important to me, and one of the reasons I'm so glad to be with everybody tonight. And then to kick us started with like a framing of the issue, we actually just received a video from former state senator and gubernatorial candidate Daniel Biss talking a little bit about the importance of the Fair Tax Campaign, and also some thanking JCUA for some of the work we have been doing on the campaign this past year. So I'm gonna get us kicked off with a few words from Daniel Biss. Let me know if everyone can hear this.
Hey, I'm Daniel Biss, former state senator, and today I want to talk about an incredibly important election happening this November. Not the presidential election, but the Illinois referendum to allow for a fair tax. Here's the story. We have an incredibly unusual, unfair tax system in Illinois because we have a strange provision in our Constitution that says that everybody pays the same income tax rate no matter what the public wants, no matter what the legislature wants.
I can't hear anything.
They are not allowed to ask the richest people in Illinois.
Are folks not able to hear this video?
It's soft.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna turn it up as much as I can. Sorry about that.
Background noise and it's mumbling and it's just noise. I didn't hear one single word that he said.
Emma, do it again and try to increase the sound.
Okay, sounds good. I'm sorry about that.
I'm on my phone, I can hear everything. So maybe it's the sound on the people.
Yeah, I'm sharing the speak, that's right.
Maybe use headphones if you can't hear.
Right.
Hey, I'm Daniel Biss, former state senator, and today I want to talk about an incredibly important election happening this November. Not the presidential election, but the Illinois referendum to allow for a fair tax. Here's the story. We have an incredibly unusual, unfair tax system in Illinois because we have a strange provision in our Constitution that says that everybody pays the same income tax rate no matter what the public wants, no matter what the legislature wants, no matter what our elected officials campaigned on. They are not allowed to ask the richest people in Illinois to pay a little bit more than someone who's working for them. Because of that, the poor and the middle class pay a higher tax rate than the very wealthy. It's unfair, it's not right, and it's starved our government from the resources that it needs to actually fund the services that we rely upon. So on our ballot is going to be a fair tax referendum. If it passes, we'll begin to have a fair tax.
Can other people hear this?
Yes, Sharon, we can.
In fact, the great majority of states.
I can.
And here's what it'll do. Number one,
Yes.
I'm having under $250,000 a year. That's
It's about a minute left, so I'm just gonna finish playing it, and for folks who can't hear it.
Hey, I'm Daniel Biss, former state senator, majority of states in the country. And here's what it'll do. Number one, it'll give a tax break to everybody making under $250,000 a year. That's 97% of Illinois households will actually be paying less under the new system. Next, they'll raise the rates for people earning over $250,000, so for the top 3%, a very modest amount to put them more or less in line with what they would be in a place like Wisconsin. Next, it would bring in around $3.5 billion to help close our state's structural deficit. It makes sense. It puts more money in the pockets of almost every person. It brings our tax system in line with our neighboring states and most of the country. It's sensible, it's important, our state needs it. Now, there are an enormous number of organizations like the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs and others working across the state to pass this referendum. I'm asking you, join us. Vote yes, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, volunteer, work with an organization that's part of this campaign. The state of Illinois needs you to pass the fair tax. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. For those of you who were able to hear the video, Daniel Biss just talking about what he sees the importance of this moment and the urgency in passing a fair tax, and how important it is that we are learning and educating ourselves around this issue, and educating ourselves around voting yes on this issue. So as we dive into more of the content from this presentation, I want to pose 2 questions for reflection that we have done at other fair tax presentations for some of our congregational partners, but really just wanting to ground this conversation in values. I know NCJW is a very values-based organization, so thinking about when we're talking about all of these, the policy behind fair tax, also thinking about the people that it impacts and the ways that Illinois prioritizes or does not prioritize investing and spending in our state. So just posing 2 questions, where do you, kind of thinking in your head, feel it is important for the Illinois state budget to prioritize investment and spending? So I know social services and education and healthcare, and thinking about the needs and the people who rely on these services in our communities and in our state. And then also, I don't need to tell you all this, but we are living in incredibly stressful and challenging times for so many of us. And so how does this moment we are living in impact your worldview, both with the pandemic and also thinking about truly prioritizing racial justice and economic justice for all people? So want people to be thinking about this as we dive into background on the fair tax and what the policy is behind it. So why are we here? Last year, Governor Pritzker signed legislation setting forth new income-based tax brackets. This was passed down in Springfield in the legislature, but since it is dependent upon an amendment to the Illinois state constitutions, we, the voters, will have the power to approve this change. And something I think is particularly interesting in the history of the fair tax is that it's only, around the flat tax that Illinois currently uses, where people are taxed at the same amount, is that it's only been around since 1970. That was the year that Illinois adopted a new state constitution to allow for a income tax, but required that the tax be flat, be non-graduated, and this restriction has really limited both the effectiveness and the fairness of the Illinois tax structure for the past 50 years. I know I've talked to some partners with the League of Women Voters and other organizations that they've really been working on this issue basically since 1970 when it was passed and trying to change it to be a more fair and graduated system. So for the past 50 years, people have been recognizing that there be a better way to raise revenue in Illinois that would be more fair to everybody. So since 1970, people have been focusing on it, and now it is our chance, and we the voters will decide during this upcoming electoral season what we will do with the state of income taxes in Illinois. So I know many of us are thinking about voting right now, how we will vote, how we will get other people to vote, and I want people to be prepared for what they will actually see on their ballot, how this issue is being framed when you go and vote. I know I've seen some questions about where will this be on the ballot? And it's actually going to be the very first thing people see. So before you vote on any candidates, before we make our choice for president, we are going to see this language surrounding the fair tax amendment as Illinois voters. So I know this is a wordy paragraph. I am going to read this aloud for you all just so you know what to expect when you see your ballot and how this issue is being framed. So what you will see is the proposed amendment grants the state authority to impose higher income tax rates on higher income individuals, which is how the federal government and a majority of other states do it. The amendment would remove the portion of the revenue article of the Illinois Constitution that is sometimes referred to as the flat tax. That requires all taxes on income to be at the same rate. The amendment does not itself change tax rates. It gives the state the ability to impose higher tax rates on those with higher income levels and lower tax rates on those with middle and lower income levels. You are asked to decide whether the proposed amendment should become a part of the Illinois Constitution. So now you all know how this issue is being written on the ballot. You'll be prepared when you see it. And one thing I want to reiterate, which also is talked about in this ballot language, is what are we actually voting on here? So we are voting to amend the Constitution to allow for a new system of taxation. And that's what our actual vote choice is going to be on when we cast our ballots. And then what we'll get into talking about later is there has been something passed in Springfield, a new system of tax brackets that is put into place, but we are not voting on the brackets, we are voting on amending the Constitution to even allow for a graduated rate in the first place. So really just want to make that clear to people when we talk about this issue with the coalition, and when you make your choice to vote, we are purely voting on amending the Constitution to allow for the flat tax to go away and a graduated system to be used in Illinois. So I know I've talked about the flat tax a little bit, and I want to dive into that a bit more here. So a flat tax means that right now everybody in Illinois, regardless of how much money you make, is paying the same percentage, 4.95%. We're all paying that in state income tax. So I know I've had conversations with other folks as we've been doing other presentations and phone banking on this issue for the past many months. And when you look at it on the surface, a flat tax may appear to be a fair way of taxing citizens because people are paying the same percentage. But when you really take a closer look, you can see that such a tax causes lower income people to pay a larger share of their income than wealthier people pay. And one way that I think about this is if a family is making, let's say, $30,000 a year, and they're paying for all their basic needs, they're paying for food and housing and all the different incidentals that arise, and then they also are paying 4.95% in state income tax, they're going to have a significantly less money left over than people who are making $300,000 and also paying for their basic needs and paying for, the same rate in taxes. So we see that as one of the causing factors of some of these wealth divides, the racial wealth gap, economic inequality in general, and taxes are a policy that can alleviate some of these unfairnesses, these injustices that are caused. And the next graph I'm about to show, I think, is a really, really powerful illustration of the impact of regressive and flat taxes in Illinois. So this graph shows the distribution of tax burden, both state and local, for people making different amounts of bringing in different incomes in Illinois. So you see that the lowest 20% of income earners in Illinois are paying 14.4% of their income in state and local taxes. So we're also including here property taxes, sales tax, excise taxes, and fees. And as opposed to the top 1% of income earners in Illinois that are proportionally paying 7.4% of their income. So we really see through these statistics what a higher burden is placed on those who make lower amounts of money to pay state and local taxes in Illinois. And that all boils down to mean that Illinois is actually the 8th most regressively taxed state in the nation, which just is not fair and negatively impacts so many people's lives. And as we said, bottom 20% of Illinois income earners have 2 times the tax burden of the wealthy. And then even thinking outside of Illinois to the Midwest and the states that we are living around, the bottom 20% of Illinois earners pay a higher percentage of their incomes in taxes than any other Midwestern state. So this is really good context to be thinking about and why there's been organizing around fair tax, why there's urgency, why we are voting on this issue in the fall. And then one other thing I really want to bring into this conversation, and I know talking with Beth and Jill and Sarah about the work that NCJW is doing around racial justice and actively anti-racist practices. I really want to also highlight here that in this moment, we cannot forget regressive taxes are racist. And I know that thinking about this tax, the flat tax can actually be something that that promotes and furthers some of these injustices. We're thinking about people statistically who are from Black and Brown communities making less money and paying a disproportionate burden in taxes. And then also, where have areas of investment in the state, where has investment been prioritized? A lot of times it is truly not in these Black and Brown communities. One thing that I think is particularly compelling is the way that education is funded in public education through property taxes, and many times these areas not having the property tax base of other areas. So that means that students have a significantly less quality education, and that really education we know is so powerful, and that furthers cycles of inequality. So thinking about who this money is coming from, what the burden is, and also where this money is going. I also want to read one more statistic that from an article Sarah Person sent that I think we should definitely send out as some follow-up for this. But there's a recent study at the Institution on Taxation and Economic Policy that found over the past 20 years under the flat tax in Illinois, Black and Latino Illinois taxpayers with taxable income less than $250,000 paid $4 billion more in taxes over this period than they would have under a fair tax. So we see what $4 billion, a large amount of money over the past 20 years that have come from these communities. And thinking about how we can shift this to make things more equitable, so we have wealth being able to be built in Black and Brown communities. And we are really speaking our values when we talk about actively being anti-racist and what policies we support, and how the fair tax really will have an impact on communities of color here in Illinois. And one other graphic that goes along with this that I think is pretty powerful is how we see there is such an enormous racial wealth gap. And we even see that in the past 10 years, there has not been a significant change in average median income for Black families, and we see a rising rate for white families. And as I said before in that slide of how does the moment we are living in impact people's views on what we're doing with this policy and investment and spending, thinking about how the disproportionate amount of Chicagoans and people in Illinois have died in Black communities because of COVID, who are frontline workers, and how we could provide better services, better healthcare to people. So that was not the case, because that has been something for me so personally sad and infuriating to watch happen, and something that could be prevented. So just wanted to bring that into this conversation. And also really connecting the fair tax to social services in Illinois and all of the things that we cannot afford to cut. So as I was mentioning before, with thinking about healthcare as such a basic need and something that we know many people just do not have proper access to. So we are really in a situation where there have been budget cuts in Illinois, and because of that, a number of mental health treatment facilities and domestic violence shelters were forced to shut their doors. Healthcare providers struggled to serve patients. 40,000 low-income children could not receive the affordable care they needed, healthcare, and 7,500 higher education jobs were lost. So thinking about all of these services that have been cut and that we want to see funded here in Illinois. And we want to see these funded, and a way to get there is the fair tax. So as I said before, a fair tax means lower income earners pay a lower rate while higher income earners pay a higher rate. And through this policy, there's been analysis, and 97% of Illinois residents will see no income tax increase, with actually the majority of middle and low income families receiving a tax cut. And then income over $250,000 a year will be what is impacted right now through the passage of a fair tax. And the title of the slide, A Fair Tax Works for All Illinoisans, really 97% is such a big percentage of the state and the residents and the taxpayers and the voters. And seeing this analysis and how it would have an impact on these folks is really what makes it work, this 97% of people. And I know I've been referencing the tax distribution of brackets, but I just wanted to also have a slide with it so you really get to see what the breakdown is. So this is something that was passed in Springfield, and with the amendment being approved would go into effect in Illinois. So you see the breakdown here of the different brackets. So just take a look at this. And then one thing that we've found helpful to have included when we're talking about taxes is just how the different brackets impact income. So have this next slide that is focusing on where people will actually be paying more. So for example, someone who makes $280,000 a year, anything below the $250,000 mark will be taxed at the lower rate. So taxed at 4.9%, 4.95%, and then just the income that is over $250,000. So the hypothetical voter I am talking about, the last $30,000 of their income will be what is taxed at this higher proposed rate of 7.75%. But really just wanting to clarify, when we see these brackets, this is what it actually means. People's, unless they are making over $1 million in earned income a year, people's taxes will be, your entire income will not be taxed at the 7.75 rate. It'll be taxed how taxes are collected in this graduated way. And then I know I said before that Illinois bottom 20% pay the highest percentage of their income in state income taxes as compared to any other Midwestern state. So really, what are our neighbors doing? And so many of our neighbors in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa, Ohio are taxing at graduated rates already. It's what the federal government is doing. And one thing that I have found in my research is actually in Minnesota, for income, I believe it's over $30,000 a year, it's taxed at over 9%. So really, some of these rates that we are talking about are actually not as hefty as the rates already used in Minnesota. So really just think it's important to see many of our neighbors are already doing this and allow for a graduated tax as they are raising revenue for their states. And then a slide about how Illinois will benefit from the fair tax. Right now, it is estimated that the fair tax will generate $3 billion a year, which can go towards investing in communities, restoring the human services that I talked about have been cut under past administrations in Illinois. So making sure that there are lower wait times to access healthcare, making sure that there are enough mental health resources to go around. These are things that are priorities and ways that we hope the fair tax will go into benefiting people's lives. Other things are knowing that there needs to be reform in state pensions, obviously, I know there's been a lot of questions about this, and I'm going to actually address it on the next slide, but we also know that more money coming in can help some of this state debt and make sure that while we know pensions need to be reformed, that Illinois is still meeting its financial obligations. We're offsetting regressive taxes. So we know that property tax and sales taxes are regressive forms of taxes. So by making our income tax more progressive, we are helping offset those regressive taxes that we saw on the slide, where we were seeing how much of a larger burden people who make lower incomes pay. And then finally, really strengthening public schools and supporting healthcare. There was a great article in the Sun Times about the two different budgets that Governor Pritzker has come forward with. And one is if a fair tax is passed, and then one is if it is not passed. And a huge difference between the two budgets is that if a fair tax is passed, there will be $150 million more going into strengthening public schools, and specifically with the state funding formula for education that we use in Illinois would go towards communities that do not generate as much money from property taxes. So really investing into those schools and those students. And so we've been doing this presentation for a while. We often get very important questions about fair tax, and we are just kind of going to go through what some of these questions have been and what our responses are. And I know there will be more time for questions and answers, and we can talk about some of these issues a little bit more closely, but just wanted to draw attention that these are really common questions that I know I've talked with folks about that I get when I am phone banking. And just wanted to go through what some of the answers are from the perspective of JCUA, from the perspective of the Fair Tax Coalition. So one of these questions, a big one, is, will retirement income be taxed? And Illinois is actually one of about 12 states that does not tax or collect any income tax on retirement income, so 401ks, IRA, pension, Social Security benefits, and fair tax reform does not change this. So I know this has actually been something we've seen in the opposition's advertisements and in their communications, but it is not something that the fair tax impacts. So for people who are worried about this, or who have maybe seen some of those advertisements, this is not something that the fair tax impacts for any sort of retirement income. And then what will the tax rates be in the future? What will the tax rates be in the future? Really wanting to assure people that this is not a blank check. Voters know exactly what new rates will go into effect when the Fair Tax Amendment is approved. And going forward, the Fair Tax Amendment doesn't give legislators any more power to raise income taxes than they already do. Any year, the legislators can vote on changing, increasing, or lowering tax rates. And through having a fair tax, that just means that they're able to do that in a graduated way. And so many of us know that raising tax rates is not the most popular thing to do for politicians who are in office. So it's something to think about when we think, what will tax rates be in the future? This is not saying that our tax rates are just gonna skyrocket, because we know there are so many other considerations that are tied up in that, but it is allowing, if there is a tax raise, to be done in a graduated way. And also there could be a tax raise right now, even using the flat tax, which means everybody, regardless of their income or ability to pay, could see an increase in their state income taxes. So all of those things are important to keep in mind when we're thinking about this question. Another one we get is, can we trust politicians? And the way that I like to answer this question is that we, as the voters, really have the power to vote people into office. We have the power to vote people out of office. And we also have the power to hold people accountable. And when politicians aren't doing what we want with our taxpayer dollars, when they are making decisions that we do not agree with, we have the power to call them, to write them a letter, to talk to other people and make sure that they know we don't think they're doing what we want. So there is a level of trust that has to happen with politicians, but we really as the voters have power here, and we can voice our opinions to people who are in these decision-making roles. And then the last two questions, will people leave Illinois? This is something we get quite often, and there's a number of studies on this, and there is not a ton of research to back up this claim. And I've seen studies that there's actually next to no correlation between a state's tax rates and the likelihood of a high-income family to leave the state. One thing I also want to draw people's attention here is that middle and low-income families have been fleeing the state for years after other administrations left the education system without enough resources to make sure that education was equitable and students had the resources they needed. So thinking about the notion that wealthy people will leave the state, that not always being true, but wanting to make sure we are also providing the resources to all residents, so low and middle income people feel like they are still getting their needs met in the state, and they are also not leaving. And then a big question, state pensions, and how does that impact this issue? So the way that I choose to talk with folks about this issue is to take a second and think about, I know there's many opinions about pension reform and how we could possibly do this reform here in Illinois, but thinking about this as a separate issue from fair tax, and how we know that we have a moment here, there's urgency, we can pass a fair tax to make things fundamentally more fair in Illinois, and that in many ways could be coupled with this pension reform, but this is not what we're voting on right now. And you can totally be in favor of pension reform and also supportive of fair tax, and knowing that, as I said before, we really have this people power, and maybe one day we'll all be making calls together about state pension reform. But right now we are educating people about fair tax, and we can't lose this opportunity to pass a fair tax because of our concerns about pensions. One great article I read about this described it as we don't want this to be a political hostage situation where pensions are taking control, and because of that, a fair tax is not able to be passed at this point in time, because we don't know how many more years it would take to get this back on the ballot here in Illinois. One last thing I'll say on this issue for now is that I think an analogy you can make is thinking about a complex issue, like our state budget issues and revenue in Illinois, being climate change. And there's many things that can combat climate change. And let's say there's a great policy to reduce carbon emissions, but people decide to sidestep that policy and not pass it because they are looking at all of the other things like solar energy and wind and capping all of the other things that impact climate change, and they're not focusing on what is actually something that they can take action on that is tangible in the moment. So that's how I would urge folks to be thinking about fair tax and the messaging that we get from JCUA and also from our coalition. So this wouldn't be a JCUA presentation, and I know that NCJW also talks a lot about Jewish values, and I just want to draw, as we kind of draw this presentation to a close, I want to talk a little bit about what is Jewish about fair tax and bringing people back to these values that we hold, values of equity and fairness that Jewish tradition also teaches about. So I know that this is kind of a tagline for many about Judaism and justice, the Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. This is on the back of the JCUA shirts. This is something that we as an organization try to embody as much as we can, but it really comes down to fair tax being the just thing to do. One interesting fact I actually learned recently, not about tzedek, but about tzedakah, is that in the tiers of tzedakah, the highest form is when the giver and the receiver do not know each other's identities, and making connections between paying taxes and that being the highest form of tzedakah, because that is the case there. And then another Jewish value is that I want to highlight here for folks is that when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field. You should leave them for the poor and for the stranger. So knowing that this is commanded of us to think about not only the impact you have, but how it impacts other people. And also the concept here of the Jubilee year and how every 7 years, people were instructed to leave their land idle for it to regenerate. And then every 49 years, people had to return all of that land to the original owners, to free all their slaves, and to really have a safeguard against the concentration of wealth in the hands of too few people. And this is something that is taught in Jewish tradition. And I see fair tax as being a modern day manifestation of a lot of these ideas surrounding the Jubilee year. Okay, so getting a little bit into more of our field plan as we close out, JCUA is working to collect 3,500 pledges from Illinois voters before Election Day. That is a big number. We are working really hard on this. Our staff, our members are working to collect these pledges to educate people around fair tax. And we've already collected over 2,200 pledges to vote. Yes, we've been working on fair tax for over a year at JCUA, and we've been doing active voter outreach since April. So really knowing that we've done a lot and there's still more to do as we lead into election season. And just also for some context here, you might be wondering what is required for fair tax to be passed. There's 2 different thresholds. These are also the thresholds just for amending the Constitution in any way, but either 50% of people who are voting in the election have to vote yes on fair tax, or 60% of people voting, if you look at the population of people who are just voting on that ballot question. So knowing that we need to reach so many people in order for fair tax to be passed, so JCUA is doing our part and making sure that we are educating our people and they know about the issue that we are going to be voting on. And as I mentioned before, we're going to send out some action steps from these presentations, but I just want to bring home the importance of this virtual pledge. We know in order to hold ourselves accountable and to knowing that we have committed to voting yes, it is shown that if we sign a pledge, we are more likely to do that. So we're going to be posting in the chat once it's enabled the link to our virtual pledge card, and we will also send it as part of our follow-up information. So just really want to draw home the importance of that. And then also, if what I said today about JCUA or our fair tax work really sparks more interest in you, there are so many ways to be involved right now. We would love to have you be a more active part of our JCUA community. We are phone banking every week. We are canvassing at farmers markets. We are doing so much to get a fair tax passed and also to work on all of the other issue campaigns. So would love to connect more if this has sparked your interest. And then with that, this is the time of the night where it has come to questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to that. I'm excited to continue to have more of a dialogue. I know that Beth is going to be asking some of the questions that you've asked, and I also believe the chat is going to be opened up at this point.
Thank you so much. A very clear presentation on what is involved and how it addresses our Illinois problems. So thank you. I have about 15 questions that were submitted before the program, and I'm going to ask you those pretty much chronologically and then go to ones that might appear in the chat box. And if somebody asks 5 or 6 questions, I'm going to alternate so that other people's questions get answered. The first question is from Merle Gross, and I think we answered a lot of it. She said, why should I trust the legislature to not impose taxes and increase rates across the board? For decades, they've chosen not to fix the budget, and Illinois debt continues to grow. Is there anything you want to, I think you answered that for the most part, but is there anything else you want to add to that? Emma, did you hear me? Aha.
Oh, sorry, it said I wasn't allowed to unmute for a second. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that is such a real question, and also boils down to having trust in our politicians and knowing that we can hold them accountable, which I talked about. So those are all important things to be thinking about, but it really boils down to we have a choice for fairness right now, and we can choose to trust the people we elected into office to enact that, and we can all hold them accountable.
Okay, thank you. From Karen Port, can the passing of the amendment allow the taxing of pensions? And I think you answered that as well. Is this amendment a test case for changing the amendment protecting teacher pensions? And I believe that you answered that pretty much, no, that's a whole separate amendment issue. A question from Randy Simborg. Can state officials continue to make changes in the tax rates beyond the 2020 rates? And then part 2, will there be any checks and balances in place for Illinoisans to voice objections once this is passed? And I think you've pretty much answered this question. Can changes continue to be made to the tax rates beyond 2020? Can people hear me?
Sorry about that. I muted myself and then it wasn't allowing me to unmute again, but I will just stay unmuted from here on out. And so, yeah, to get back at that question you were talking about, Beth, with the thinking about the tax rates, and those are what will go into effect, but the legislature can really raise or alter taxes anytime they want. They could raise the flat tax rate, and there's actually been some studies that if this fair tax amendment is not passed, then we would see actually a pretty large increase in the flat tax rate across the board. So knowing that we want to see things be done in a more fair and equitable way than we have in Illinois, then we know that we can hold our elected officials accountable, and this is a good first step towards doing that. But those are the rates that would go into effect, at least at first, but they can be altered. But knowing that the legislature really has the power to do that at any time.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Sharon Eisman. The ads for this tax seem misleading. Only millionaires and billionaires will pay more, yet the tax will hit people with an income of $250,000 and above. Is annual income of $250,000 the new definition for billionaire?
Yeah, no, I've also seen some of that messaging, and at least the way that I choose to think about this is that, yeah, that is misleading in certain ways, and it could be really easy to get caught up in arms about the semantics of that and what it represents. But I don't think it should distract us from recognizing the importance of fair tax and all the good that this amendment could do for us, for our city and for our state and for our communities. And the semantics, the messaging of that, I know people might have issues with, but I sincerely hope that it does not distract people enough to urge them to vote no on this amendment.
Thank you. There's some other questions that are somewhat redundant, but what does this mean for the inheritance tax? What does this mean for the inheritance tax, which I think is a federal tax, but.
Yeah, that's what I was also going to say, Beth. And to the best of my knowledge, the fair tax does not impact that. I have not heard or read that anywhere. So I believe just no impact.
Okay. Lynn Altschul has a concern that pension funds would be modified in order to help reduce Illinois' debt before raising the state income tax rates. I think you answered a lot of that. Okay. Sharon Eisman has another question. What are the proposed income tax brackets? And I think you explained that pretty well in the slides. And also, once the rates are set, the only way they can be changed is to have the legislature do that. Is there a property tax relief associated with this income tax rate hike? It's not a rate hike. Is there a property tax relief associated with this, the amendment?
Yeah, so that is not, property tax relief is not a part of the fair tax amendment. It's not what we're going to be voting on. So the answer to that question is no.
Okay. Let me get back. There's a multi-part question. Let me get back to that. Okay. The campaign pressing for passage of the amendment is being supported financially, a lot of it by Governor Pritzker, also by Ken Griffin. Has the appropriate body weighed in on the ethics of this, of Pritzker contributing to the campaign? And let me do the whole question.
Yeah, I've definitely seen commentary on this. This is something I've talked to voters about. Oh. What was that, Beth? Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. I think, yeah, just what are the ethics of him doing this? Which is sort of an extraneous question, but you.
Yeah, I think that this is actually. Yeah, that's such a great question to be asking. And I think it also dives into some larger questions about money and politics and campaign finance. And these are, I'm sure that NCJW has done programs on these before and will continue to engage on these topics. And I think it's a really good open debate of like, yeah, what are the ethics of this? And what does that mean for the impact? How does that impact voters' decisions? How does that impact so much in our society? So the best answer I have to that question is that I think this is a great open dialogue to be having with folks. And it's not just in favor of Governor Pritzker putting money, we also see Ken Griffin putting in a tremendous amount of money on the other side. So it really goes both ways on this issue and strikes at a larger issue.
Okay, thank you. I think that is most of the questions that we've had in advance. Emma, can you see the questions here too? Anna Rubin, who's also with Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, has answered a number of those things. Magda Roth says, please tell the attendees more about how it will look on the ballot. I'm concerned that people will not realize what it is. And I think that refers to it as being the first item on the ballot and that you've read it. So it doesn't say, will you vote on the fair tax? It's this sort of lengthy language. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it'll be the first thing on your ballot, but it actually won't say the phrase fair tax. It'll say this big chunk that I read. And also Anna has recently posted in the chat, which for me really drives home the importance of having conversations with voters. So then when they see this big paragraph about taxes, they don't get scared. They know what it means. So this is something I've really been incorporating into my conversations with voters when I phone bank and when we do presentations, so people are as informed as they can be.
Okay. And Merle Gross said the problem is spending, and Anna, which yes, but we've seen what happens when things get cut too badly. And Anna Rubin responded in the chat box about that. And I'm having trouble reading this, folks. Sorry about this. The only change that we're making here is how we raise the revenue that we know we need to spend. So again, the spending is talk to your legislators. What else can we do? And the big, yes, there's big structural problems with real estate taxes and sales tax, but that's not what this is about. This is strictly about the income tax. The question from Gloria Lippert, why was a flat tax instead of a graduated tax originally set forth in the tax amendment? And I think that goes back to the history of 10 or 15 years ago when the flat tax was passed. Emma, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what Anna put in the chat is right. It was a Republican governor at the time, and it was a politically feasible people to get at least some sort of an income tax in Illinois, but it was a compromise to make that a flat tax and not a graduated tax at that point. So that's why we see that legacy living on today and why we're trying to change it.
Okay. Merle asks, Pritzker had his wife and brother-in-law take the blame for uninhabitable property due to toilets. He avoided significant property tax. Finally, under pressure, he did repay the city. So that's a comment. Okay, I'm looking. Oh, Magda Roth said, it is not clearly the first item on the ballot in Will County. Emma, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that's a really good flag to raise. We mostly work with voters in Cook County and Lake County, and we've been told that it will be at the top of the ballot there, but thanks for correcting me that in all counties in Illinois, it may not necessarily be the first thing, but we'll definitely be seeing it on your ballots all over the state. Okay,
thank you. Elena Marone asks, you showed a chart where 20% of lower income people pay 14% of taxes, while 1% pays only 7%. Could you please explain why? Give examples. Maybe how could it be if everyone pays 4.9%?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that chart that I showed before was not just state income tax. That was also thinking about property taxes and sales tax and excise taxes and fees in Illinois. And knowing that the property and sales taxes are regressive taxes where no matter what your income is, you're still paying the same, these people don't have as large of an ability to pay, but they are still being taxed. So that makes it regressive. And then having the flat tax doesn't do anything to help that. It really just, you see how regressive taxes have an impact, and the way that we do our current flat tax doesn't help make it any more of a progressive system. It just furthers the regressive nature of those other taxes. So that's why you see the 2 times higher burden because of all of these cumulative taxes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if Anna or Sarah also have things to add to that answer, different examples to share.
Okay. Anita Kosovo asks, pension reform seems to be the most urgent problem facing Illinois now and the foreseeable future. That's again not addressed. Yes, it's a very serious problem, but that's not what the fair tax is addressing, is asking people to decide about. Again, that's a question to keep bringing up to your legislators. Okay. I think there are a few comments that I think we can add to in the summary. Are there any other questions that you have? Folks in the audience, enter them in the chat box.
One thing I do want to say, Beth, is, and we have a number of other JCUA resources around fair tax. So if other questions come up that you might not necessarily think of right now, or you want to just dive in and learn more about the issue, we have some resources we can send you all to include
Okay.
in full.
Yeah, and we have a number of things that we will be sending in the follow-up. Okay. I think that we've answered most of the questions. And anything else to follow up on? And again, we will have a follow-up and address this. And I know that Anna has been answering a lot of the questions. So I want to give a brief preview of next month's Salon, and then we'll wind up. The follow-up from our August meeting about communities and policing, our program is going to be Broken Windows and Beyond, Art as Activism. Faith Kohler, who's an attorney, she's been a federal agent, a filmmaker about homelessness, and a visual artist, is going to be talking, as I said, on Broken Windows and Beyond, Art and Activism. And she's an NCJW member, so it'll be a very fascinating program. Thank you very, very much, Emma, and Anna also for helping. And again, thank you so much for attending, for your questions. We will keep the questions open for a few more minutes if you want to add anything. And I think we've all learned a lot. Thank you so much. I'm going to clap.
Thanks, Beth, for organizing and everyone else involved.
Oh, thank you. It's been great working with JCUA and Emma and Anna. So I see a thumbs up. Thank you, Sharon.